Ah, hello chat. Hello chat. How are we doing? It's so lovely to see you all. Welcome to the Tuesday stream where tonight, or today, or whatever time it is where you are, I'll be reading more of your suggestions for Reddit stories, and exploring Reddit just that little bit further. I've been having a great time doing these. I know that a lot of you guys tell me that you like them too, so let's keep doing them. Let's keep doing them. Hello everyone. Hello, and welcome. Now, first of all, before we get going with tonight's Reddit story, I have to congratulate you guys, chat. I actually cannot believe that we managed to hit 100 likes on my previous Expedition 33 video, which means, as promised, I will be cosplaying as the main character in the skin that I managed to acquire. So well done, chat. Well done. It actually blew me away. I genuinely think that this is like one of the first big milestones that we've managed to hit as a community, and I am so happy. So I've already started sourcing all of the materials for it, and I'm hoping to be able to pull it together sooner rather than later. Like I said, because this happened so quickly, I can't promise that it'll be ready for the next stream, but I am on it. I am on it, because I made a promise, and I intend to keep it. So, keep an eye out for that. It is going to be... It's going to be wild, I'll be honest with you. It's going to be wild. But yes, no, today, chat. Today, for those of you who have come to join, thank you so much, Joe, for the 249. Big milestone. It really is, man. It is one of the biggest milestones that I think we've managed to hit thus far. And I'm so proud. I'm so proud of you, chat. I actually can't believe that you guys have got us there. It's genuinely kind of nuts. But chat, tonight we are not here to talk about Expedition 33. No. Tonight, we are here to read more stories that you guys have sent me on Reddit. Now, I have two stories lined up for you tonight, both of which have been suggested by chat. There's this first one, which is from r/nosleep by Creepy Stories Jr. And there's also this one, which again is on r/nosleep by LX Scarins. So I think what we'll do is we'll probably start with this one, just because it's a little bit longer, and we'll see how long it takes us to read this one story. And then, if we manage to get through it in enough time, we will then move on to the next one. However, if it proves to be longer than I expect, what we'll do is we'll save this other story for next time. But without further ado, chat, without further ado, why don't we get into the world, as I say, of r/nosleep, and this story by Creepy Studios Jr. Okay, what the fuck am I even saying? Let's get into it. Let's get into this story by Creepy Stories Jr. From 16 days ago, so this is a relatively new one. And this one is titled, I took my friend to the ER late last night. I don't think we're in a real hospital anymore. So, chat, enjoy. It was past midnight when Chris and I left the 24-hour diner at the edge of town. We'd spent the evening catching up over burgers and coffee, talking about high school memories and future plans that would likely never materialize. We strolled towards my car, parked a little further down the block, and Chris slowed his pace. I glanced over and noticed him rubbing his temples, and he was pale. Everything okay, man? I asked half-jokingly. Too much greasy diner food? Chris shook his head, wincing as he leaned against a nearby lamppost. No, it's different, he mumbled. Everything's spinning. He grimaced, clutching his stomach as he swayed on his feet. I rushed over and grabbed him by the arm, just as his legs gave out. His breathing was ragged, each breath shallow and strained. A jolt of panic shot through me. I wasn't sure what was happening, but it was more than just a bad burger. Come on, I said, guiding him towards the car. We need to get you to the hospital. We barely made it to the passenger seat before he collapsed completely. I managed to push him inside, buckling his seatbelt as he I managed to push him inside, buckling his seatbelt as his head lolled against the inside window. His breathing had grown faint, his skin cold. I didn't waste any more time. I jumped into the driver's seat and sped towards the hospital. The roads were empty, the entire town blanketed in a pale bluish light that made everything look strangely surreal. When the hospital finally came into view, I pulled up to the emergency entrance and skidded to a stop. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and I half-dragged, half-carried Chris inside. The bright fluorescent lights inside the emergency room burned my eyes as I shouted for help. A nurse and security guard rushed over immediately. Chris was placed on a gurney and whisked away to a triage room. I tried to follow, but the nurse held up a hand. "You need to stay in the waiting room, sir. Someone will come to speak to you soon." Reluctantly, I turned back and made my way to the waiting room. It was a small, uninvited space lined with rows of faded plastic chairs. The harsh lighting overhead buzzed like a hive of angry bees, casting a cold, sterile glow over everything. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, with a hint of something stale, like old coffee or cheap hospital food. The reception desk sat at the far end of the room, cluttered with stacks of paperwork and a dusty computer monitor. Behind the desk, a tired-looking receptionist typed away with little enthusiasm, barely glancing up as I entered. She looked like she'd been working the night shift for years, with deep shadows under her eyes and a weary slump in her posture. A glass partition separated her from the waiting area, with a small sliding window used to speak to patients. Aside from the receptionist, there were only a few other people scattered around the room. A middle-aged man in a wrinkled jacket sat slumped in a chair, staring blankly at the floor tiles, his face pale and drawn. Across from him, a young woman scrolled through her phone, her foot tapping rhythmically against the chair leg. In the far corner, an elderly woman with a hunched back knitted quietly, her lips moving as she muttered to herself, though I couldn't make out the words. The wall-mounted TV flickered above. Showing a muted news broadcast, with closed captions scrolling across the screen. Next to it, a clock ticked irregularly, the second hand jerking with each movement as though struggling to keep time. The room itself seemed caught in some sort of liminal state. I chose a seat near the corner, trying to calm my breathing. I pissed my pants. My heart was still racing from the rush to the hospital. The seat beneath me was stiff and uncomfortable, offering little relief from the tension gripping my body. I shifted, trying to find a better position, when I felt something crinkle under my leg. Frowning, I reached down to pull out a crumpled piece of paper that had been wedged into the chair. It was old and yellowed at the edges, like it had been left there for a while. Curious, I unfolded the paper and smoothed it out on my lap. The handwriting was rushed, uneven, as if whoever wrote it had been in a hurry or panicked. The list was numbered, and as I began to read, I couldn't help but feel a mix of surprise and amusement at what was written there. Rule 1. Avoid making eye contact with the receptionist between 2 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. I raised an eyebrow. That seemed oddly specific. Why would anyone write something like that? I glanced over at the receptionist who was tapping away at her keyboard, oblivious to the rest of the room. Was this some kind of prank? The idea made me smirk a little, despite the heaviness in the air. Rule 2. Never piss your pants. Rule 2. Never walk past the reception desk without greeting the receptionist after 2:30 a.m. I let out a short, dry laugh. So I'm supposed to be polite now, I muttered under my breath, shaking my head. It was so ridiculous. Maybe someone had written this as a joke to mess with people and stuck it here at odd hours, who were stuck here at odd hours bored out of their minds. I could imagine some bored night shifter scribbling these rules out as a way to pass the time. Rule 3. If a visitor arrives asking for directions, do not help them. I paused. That one was strange. It carried a different weight compared to the others. Who wouldn't help someone lost in a hospital of all places? 4. If you hear your friend's voice calling from down the hallway, Do not leave the waiting room and look for them. The amusement drained from my expression. I felt a chill run up my spine as if the temperature in the room had just dropped a few degrees. I glanced towards the dimly lit hallway that led to the ER rooms. It seemed to stretch into darkness. I shook my head, pushing the thought away. This list was just some random nonsense, wasn't it? I continued reading, my curiosity now tinged with unease. Rule 5. If a power outage occurs, stay seated and do not move. Rule 6. If a door that should be locked is found open, close it immediately and do not look inside. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I couldn't explain why, but each rule seemed to grow darker, more foreboding as I read on. It wasn't just the contents of the rules. It was the way that they were written, as if someone were trying to warn me. Rule 7. Do not look through the glass doors leading to the courtyard after 4 a.m. Rule 8. If you feel a sudden chill, do not look over your shoulder. That one made me swallow hard. There was something inherently unsettling about the thought of a chill creeping up on you from behind and not being able to turn around to see what or who might be there. I couldn't help but glance behind me, but there was nothing there. Just the same sterile room with its faded chairs and buzzing lights. I reached the last rule, and for some reason, my heart beat a little faster. Rule 9. If a security guard tells you it's time to leave, check the clock before listening. It's safe to leave after 6 a.m. My gaze flicked up to the wall-mounted clock, its second hand twitching with every tick. It read 1:30 a.m. At the bottom of the paper, written in shaky red ink, were the words, "Trust me, I learned the hard way." There was a dark, crusted stain on the corner, one that looked disturbingly like dried blood. The sight of it made my stomach twist. I rubbed my fingers over the words, feeling the rough texture of the ink beneath my skin. I couldn't help but let out a short, nervous laugh. What kind of place is this? I whispered to myself. I slumped back in the chair. It was hard to shake the nagging feeling in the back of my mind, but I forced myself to dismiss it as a weird prank. The list couldn't actually mean anything. Just someone's twisted idea of a joke. I leaned my head back against the wall and closed my eyes, trying to calm my thoughts. A part of me couldn't stop thinking about Chris and the way he'd collapsed in the parking lot. The quiet hum of the waiting room wrapped itself around me, making the place feel even more isolating. And that's when I heard it. My name, spoken in a low, barely audible voice that seemed to drift down the hallway. Adam. Adam. My eyes shot open and my body tensed. The voice was unmistakable. It was Chris. I jerked my head towards the corridor leading to the ER rooms, but there was no one in sight. Just the pale overhead lights flickering. The voice came again, a little louder this time. Adam, help me. I jumped up from the chair, the sound of my name sending shivers down my spine. My feet were already moving before I realized it. I took a few steps into the hallway. I glanced back at the waiting area, now a few steps behind me. The other visitors, still scattered about, seemed completely unaware, oblivious to the voice echoing down the hall. Adam. Chris's voice was more desperate now, laced with pain. I took another step down the hallway, my footsteps echoing against the floor. As I walked deeper into the corridor, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed louder, some of them flickering out completely, leaving long stretches of darkness. The ER rooms lined the sides of the hallway, their doors slightly ajar. I hesitated as I reached one of the open doorways. I peered inside and immediately wished I hadn't. There, standing in the center of a dimly lit room, was a man in a patient's gown facing me. The man's head moved quick, jerking motions, shaking from side to side so rapidly that I couldn't make out any details. It was just a blur, a sickening blur. Then, without any warning, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, and I stumbled back in shock. My breathing grew shallow as I tried to make sense of what I'd just seen, but there was no time to process it. Chris's voice came again, further down the hallway. "Adam, please." I pushed forward, forcing myself to continue. The unsettling darkness around me seemed to press in from all sides. I came across another room, the door half open, and inside I could see a doctor standing over a patient, his back hunched as he examined something on the table. The doctor wore a white lab coat and surgical mask, his features obscured, but there was something off about the way he moved. His motions were robotic. Then I noticed the tool in his hand, a bone saw. He raised it slowly, the harsh metal glinting under the dim light, and then I heard a gut-wrenching scream from the patient on the table. I stumbled backwards, slamming into the door behind me, my eyes wide with terror, and when I looked back into the room, it was empty. There was no doctor, no patient, just a dark, vacant space. My hands trembled as I rubbed my face, trying to snap out of whatever hallucination I was trapped in. "Oh, this can't be real," I whispered to myself, but the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of me, and Chris's voice continued to call out, drawing me further in. I pissed my pants as I turned the next corner, and I froze. There, hanging in the doorway of a nearby room, was a mass of dark hair, long and tangled, spilling down from just behind the door frame. It looked like someone was standing behind the door, peeking around the corner. A single eye, black as pitch, stared directly at me from the darkness. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The figure remained there, still and silent, just watching me. I took a slow step forward, and then the eye pulled back into the shadows, disappearing from view. The hallway was deathly quiet, save for the low hum of lights. I forced myself to move past the doorway, my pulse hammering in my ears. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the figure again, just around the corner of the room, her head unnaturally high, as if she were crouched against the ceiling. I could see more of her this time, her elongated arms stretched out, the bony hand reaching towards me, but before I could react, the hand brushed my shoulder, cold and corpse-stiff. Its fingers scratched into my skin like claws. I bolted, my shoes squeaking on the linum, as I raced down the hallway. I had no idea where I was going. I just wanted to get away from whatever that thing was. I threw open the first door, and I stumbled back into the waiting room. My heart pounded in my chest as I staggered to a stop. Everything appeared normal again. The reception desk, the plastic chairs, the other visitors who hadn't moved an inch. It was as if none of it had happened. But my skin prickled with the lingering touch of that hand. Glancing at my shoulder, I noticed 3 faded scratch marks that reminded me that something was very, very wrong. I slumped back into a chair, catching my breath, trying to make sense of the nightmare that I'd just experienced. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled list of rules, my hands trembling as I unfolded it. I glanced at Rule 4 again, the words seeming to taunt me. If you hear your friend's voice calling down the hallway, do not leave the waiting room to look for them. I'd ignored it, and now I was starting to believe that those rules weren't a joke at all. I tried to calm myself, my breathing coming in short, ragged gasps as I leaned back in the chair. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to force myself to think rationally. Or maybe I was just sleep-deprived, or maybe the stress of seeing Chris's collapse was catching up to me. I told myself that I'd only imagined those things I saw in the hallway. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, the feeling of that cold hand brushing against my skin lingered. I glanced at the clock. 1:45 a.m. The minutes seemed to crawl by. I couldn't shake the dread that had settled in my chest. My thoughts drifted back to the list of rules. Each one seemed ridiculous on its own. But after my experience in the hallway, I found myself paying closer attention to each word. And that was when I noticed him. A man who hadn't been in the room before. He stood near the entrance, his hands stuffed into his pockets of a long coat, his eyes scanning the waiting room like he was searching for someone. His presence sent a jolt of unease through me. I wasn't sure if he hadn't been there earlier. I would have remembered his tall, lanky figure, and the unsettling way his gaze seemed to linger on the visitors, one by one. The list I pulled from my pocket. The list. I pulled it from my pocket and read the third rule again. If a visitor arrives asking for directions, do not help them. The man's gaze found me, and he started walking to where I sat. My body stiffened, every muscle tensing involuntarily. There was no mistaking his intention. He stopped a few feet away, leaning slightly forward, as though inspecting me. "Excuse me," in a voice that was calm and too deliberate. "Could you help me find the ICU? I seem to be a little lost." The tone of his voice was polite enough, but there was something off about it, something that put me on edge. It was as though he was trying to mimic normal speech, but wasn't quite getting it right. I glanced around the waiting room, but no one else seemed to notice the man's presence. The receptionist didn't even look up. I shook my head, gripping the list tighter in my hand. "I'm sorry. I can't help you," I stammered. The man didn't move. He just kept staring at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice growing softer, almost coaxing. "It won't take but a moment. Just down the hall, right?" I didn't know what to say. A part of me felt guilty for not helping him, but the words on the list kept flashing in my mind. Do not help them. I forced myself to look away, hoping he would take the hint and leave, but instead he took a step closer. "It's not very kind to ignore someone who needs help," he said, his tone now edged with something darker. I glanced at his face, and for a split second his features seemed to shift. His mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural grin, the kind that didn't belong on a human face. The corners of his lips seemed to extend too far, the teeth behind them slightly jagged. I shot up from my chair, stumbling backwards, and the man's smile didn't waver as he turned his head slightly, like he was examining me from a different angle. Then he turned towards the reception desk and started walking, slowly and unnatural. At one point, his head snapped towards me unnaturally, the same grin on his face, and he continued walking. I froze. I couldn't look away. Then, as he reached the reception desk, he just passed through it. And then he suddenly disappeared. My gaze darted around the waiting room. The other visitors were still exactly where they had been moments ago, their expressions unchanged, their movements as mechanical as before. I glanced back at the receptionist. She was still at her desk, her face illuminated by the pale glow of the computer screen. My gaze flicked up at the clock on the wall. It was 1:58 a.m., and Rule 1 flashed into my mind. Avoid making eye contact with the receptionist between 2 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. After a few minutes, I glanced towards her, my eyes drifting out of habit. It was just for a second. The receptionist was staring straight at me, her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. She wasn't moving. It was as if she'd been waiting for this moment. I tore my gaze away, my pulse quickening. As I turned my head, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed her get up from her chair, her movements oddly stiff, as though her joints didn't bend the right way. She walked forward, but not around the reception desk. She just passed through it like it wasn't even there. I froze, not daring to look directly at her again. I squeezed my eyes shut, and I felt the air grow colder, the chill pressing against my skin. It felt as if she was getting closer. I could feel the faintest rustle of fabric, the light creak of footsteps on the floor, growing louder with each passing second. Don't look, just don't look, I told myself, my hands gripping the edges of the chair. I sat there tense and unmoving, my eyes squeezed shut, as if I could will her away by sheer force of will. Then everything went still. The room fell into an unnatural quiet. The buzz of the fluorescent lights, and the only sound left. Then, everything went still. The room fell into an unnatural quiet. The buzz of the fluorescent lights, the only sound left to ground me in reality. I opened my eyes slowly, half expecting to see her standing inches away from me, her face contorted into something inhuman. But the receptionist was back at her desk, looking down at her monitor, her posture as unbothered as if she hadn't moved at all. The people in the waiting room seemed unchanged, as though nothing unusual had happened. I glanced at the clock. 2:40 a.m. A wave of relief washed over me. My shoulders sagged as the tension finally started to leave my body. I forced myself to my feet, my legs still shaky beneath me. I couldn't just sit there, feeling like a trapped animal. I needed to move, to clear my head. As I got up to walk around the room, I remembered Rule 2. Never walk past the reception desk without greeting the receptionist after 2:30 a.m. I wasn't about to take any chances. I turned towards the receptionist and gave her a nod, trying to keep my voice steady. Hi, I mumbled awkwardly. She didn't look up, didn't react at all, just continued to type away on the keyboard. I took that as a good sign and began walking in a slow circle around the waiting room, forcing myself to stay calm, to pretend that everything was normal. The chill in the air hadn't entirely left. As I walked, I could feel a subtle shift in the temperature, a lingering cold that seemed to follow me. The overhead lights flickered faintly, casting brief shadows along the walls, giving the impression that the room was expanding and contracting with each pulse. As I rounded the corner, I felt the presence behind me. Something that wasn't there before. I didn't hear footsteps, but I sensed it nonetheless, like the weight of unseen eyes pressing against my back. It was close, just out of reach. My instinct was to turn and look, to confront whatever was creeping up behind me, but I clenched my jaw and I kept my gaze forward, remembering Rule 8. If you feel a sudden chill, do not look over your shoulder. I walked faster, my pulse quickening, as the chill seemed to grow longer and stronger with every step. The lights buzzed louder, the flickering more erratic. I felt something brush against the back of my neck, cold and light like a breath. I didn't stop until I reached the chairs again, sinking into one with a shuddering breath. The presence faded, though the air remained icy, and I rubbed my hands together to warm them. I glanced back towards the reception desk, half expecting to see the receptionist watching me again. But she remained focused on her monitor, her face lit by the soft glow of the screen. I leaned back in my chair, my heart still racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that the rules on that crumpled piece of paper weren't just random scribbles left behind to scare people. Whatever game I'd found myself in, it wasn't a joke, and now the only way out seemed to be playing along. I sat there for a long moment, my body trembling, trying to calm my nerves and slow my breathing. That was when I heard the automatic doors slide open, and a soft hiss. That's when I heard the automatic doors slide open with a soft hiss. I looked up, expecting to see another late-night visitor, or a nurse making rounds, but my heart almost stopped when I saw who stepped inside. It was Chris. He looked perfectly fine, normal. His face had colour, his clothes were clean. There wasn't a single sign that anything had been wrong with him. Relief rushed through me, and I felt the tension in my muscles finally ease. Chris's eyes found mine, and he broke into a smile as he walked over. "Hey, Adam," he said casually, his voice the same as always. "They let me out early." The relief was so overwhelming that I laughed out loud. "Chris! Man, you scared the hell out of me," I said, shaking my head. "Are you okay? You looked pretty bad earlier." He shrugged, giving me a dismissive wave of his hand as he settled into the chair next to me. Yeah, I'm fine now. Whatever it was, I guess it passed. They ran a few tests and said there was nothing serious." He flashed that familiar grin, the one I'd seen 1,000 times. "Guess I'm just too stubborn to stay sick." As we talked, something in the back of my mind itched. There was an unsettling quality to the conversation, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Chris was acting normal. Too normal. He was speaking in a calm, deliberate tone, his words perfectly measured. I brushed it off, figuring it was just my nerves playing tricks on me after everything that had happened tonight. And still, as Chris continued to talk, a strange sense of déjà vu settled over me. It was as if the conversation was looping back on itself, repeating the same phrases. His voice had the same rhythm, the same inflection, almost like a recording on a loop. Suddenly, I turned to see a nurse walking briskly down the hallway pushing a gurney, and my stomach dropped when I saw who was lying on it. Chris. He was unconscious, hooked up to a heart monitor, an oxygen mask over his face. My gaze darted back to the seat next to me, but the chair was empty. The Chris who'd been sitting beside me was gone, vanished as though he'd never been there at all. My skin prickled as a wave of cold panic spread through me. I stared at the empty chair for a long moment, my heart pounding in my ears. Then I saw a nurse walking by the waiting room. She glanced over at me briefly, her expression neutral. I jumped up from my chair. "Wait!" I called over after her. "Is Chris okay? My friend, he was just sitting here. What's going on?" The nurse slowed, turning to look at me with a small, tight-lipped smile. "Your friend is stable," she said, "but he hasn't woken up yet." Her words hung in the air, leaving me cold and confused. I glanced back at the empty seat, and then at the nurse as she continued down the ER hallway. My head was spinning. Had Chris really been here? Or had I just imagined him? I sank back into my chair, my body heavy with fatigue and fear. I glanced at the clock again. 3 a.m. Time was moving, but not in the way it should have. I felt trapped, as though the minutes were pulling me further into the unknown. I pulled the crumpled list of rules from my pocket and unfolding it with trembling hands. My eyes scanned the lines again, looking for answers that weren't there. I needed to understand what was happening to me, what was happening to this place. But the rules only deepened the mystery, the words twisting in my mind like a riddle that I couldn't solve. Time seemed to move strangely now. I couldn't tell how long I'd been sitting in the chair, or how long I'd been wandering the waiting room. The clock seemed to skip minutes, or stall entirely, and my sense of reality continued to blur. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the fatigue that clung to me like a shroud. I glanced at the clock again. It showed 5:55 a.m. Almost there, I thought. Almost free. That was when a security guard appeared in the doorway, his silhouette casting a long shadow across the waiting room floor. He was a broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed mustache and a calm, almost reassuring presence. He walked towards me with an easy stride and stopped just a few feet away. "Sir, it's time to leave," he said in a deep, measured voice. "The ER is closing for non-patient visitors." I blinked, my thoughts catching up slowly. "But my friend Chris is still—" Just then, I saw Chris walking out of the ER hallway. He waved at me, a tired but genuine smile on his face, and relief flooded through me. And as I started to get up, I then hesitated, the words from Rule 9 echoing in my head. If a security guard tells you it's time to leave, check the clock before listening. I turned my gaze towards the clock above the reception desk. 6:01 a.m. My shoulders sagged in relief. I was finally free of this place. I nodded and followed the security guard towards the exit, Chris walking beside me as we stepped out into the cool morning air. I felt like I could finally breathe again. We got into my car and I started the engine. I felt a small smile tug at my lips. I pulled out of the hospital parking lot, the tension in my chest slowly beginning to fade. But as I drove, a strange unease crept over me. The world outside the car window seemed darker than it should have been. I glanced at the sky. It was still a deep, inky black with no trace of the early morning light. It was too dark, too quiet. I squinted, peering between the trees lining the road, and my heart skipped a beat. In the shadows I saw faint figures standing there, their forms barely visible, distorted as if they were made of mist. Panic surged through me. I glanced at the dashboard clock and my stomach dropped. 4:30 a.m. How was that possible? It had been well past 6 a.m. when we left the hospital. I turned to look at Chris in the passenger seat, my heart pounding in my ears. But it wasn't Chris. There was a shadow there, sitting beside me. Its form was a vague silhouette, its face obscured, but I could still feel it watching me, felt its eyes boring into my skin. I gasped, my grip on the steering wheel tightening as my vision blurred with fear. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt in the middle of the road. Suddenly, I was back in the waiting room, seated in the same stiff plastic chair. The security guard stood in front of me, a grin spreading slowly across his face, his eyes unnaturally wide and gleaming in the harsh fluorescent light. "Time to leave," he said again, his voice echoing in my head like a taunt. I felt my mind start to unravel. Had I ever left the hospital at all? Was I trapped here, destined to relive all these twisted events over and over again? I buried my face in my hands, my breathing ragged as a sense of hopelessness washed over me. It felt like hours passed, but it could have been minutes or even seconds. I didn't know anymore. I was dimly aware of a nurse standing in front of me, her voice calm and soothing, pulling me back from the edge. "Sir, your friend is stable," she said gently. "He's going to be okay, but he needs rest. He'll be transferred to a hospital room soon, and you can visit him during regular visiting hours." I looked up at her, my vision clearing slowly. The waiting room was just as it had been. No sign of a security guard or anything out of the ordinary. I glanced at the clock. It read 6:30 a.m., and a soft glow of morning sunlight filtered through the glass doors, filling the room with a warm light. The nightmare was over. I nodded to the nurse, murmuring my thanks, and stumbled out of the ER. The cool morning air was a welcome relief. As I reached my car, I glanced back at the hospital, half expecting to see something out of place, but it looked like any other hospital in the early light. Mundane and unthreatening. I got in the car and drove home, the sun finally rising to chase away the last remnants of darkness. Later that day, I returned to the hospital to visit Chris. He was awake, sitting up in bed and looking surprisingly well for someone who'd collapsed so suddenly the night before. "Hey," I said, my voice trembling slightly as I pulled a chair up beside. "How are you feeling?" Chris chuckled weakly. "Better than I should, I guess," he replied. "But I had the weirdest dreams last night. It was like I was half conscious the whole time." My heart skipped a beat. "What kind of dreams?" Chris frowned, his brow furrowing as he tried to recall. "One of them was, I came in the ER and saw you sitting there in a waiting room. You looked pretty freaked out. And there was another one. We were leaving the hospital together, just driving away into the night." A cold shiver ran down my spine, but I forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah, weird," I said quietly, my mind racing with the memory of last night's events. As we sat there talking, I glanced at my shoulder, where a constant pain kept tugging at me. and saw 3 scratch marks from last night. I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, out there in the darkness of the night I had just escaped, something was still waiting. And the rules of this place would not be so easily forgotten. Well, chat. Well, that is the story. I hope that you all enjoyed, and maybe it will give you some pause for thought the next time you have bad dreams, or awake to find yourself in a dark room, or maybe, just maybe, you take someone and some weird shit starts happening. I don't know. I lost track of that one. What does the hyperlink at the forgotten link say? I don't know. We can find out, I guess, but who knows? Guess we're gonna go on this journey together. We're either gonna lose the channel or we're gonna get cancelled. Let's find out together. Oh, it's a creepy stories list. No way. If you'd like to narrate any of my stories, contact me for permission. Uh-oh. Oh no. Oh no. Rover Elliott, thank you so much for the 5 memberships. Oh, bollocks. Well, I guess I'm gonna have to find this person, hey. Oh dear. Hello, Cree. Welcome to the chat. Yeah, oops. Yeah, big oopsies. Oh no. I did? What? I did? Did I what? No, I don't think I did. I don't think I actually did. I didn't know that this was something that needed to happen. Oh my god. I guess just apologize and say you didn't see that. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I just found the story, man. I didn't actually know that was a thing. It should have said it at the top. It should have said, if it would have said it up here, then I wouldn't have done it. But, like, it didn't say anything about that at the top here. Like, up here. It should have said it here at the start of the story. But it didn't. It says it here. Well, I guess we're just going to have to reach out to them at some point and be like, hey, so, you know, I didn't see that. Whoopsies. Big oopsies. But anyway, we continue, chat. We continue with more Reddit stories. Does this one have secret things at the bottom? No, this doesn't have secret things at the bottom either. So, instead, we are going to move on. We are going to move on to another r/nosleep, actually. Yeah, hopefully they're chill about it. Yeah, putting it... It wasn't even at the bottom. It wasn't even at the bottom. It wasn't even in the story. It was in a hyperlink on a different page. So, well, I guess we'll just have to reach out to them and say whoopsie doodles and see what they say. And if they ask me to take the stream down, then, well, I don't know, man. I do have secret things at the bottom. Do you, Joe? Do you? But anyway, yeah. It is a weird way to do it, but, like, you know, no disrespect to them. Like, you know, people have the right to their own stories. I just didn't see that, so I'll reach out to them later. But we move on, chat. We move on to the second story of the night, which again is on r/nosleep. This is written by Alex Scarins. It was written 10 days ago, and it is entitled, My Dad and I Took a Hike on the Appalachian Trail, and he didn't follow the rules. He put us both in mortal danger. Now, I know the guys from Old Gods of Appalachia, and I wonder if maybe this has a relationship to them in some way. Now, that would be pretty cool if it did, but there's only one way to find out. So, together, chat, we will discover. Now, in this story. Are you ready? Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. The forest is older than you, older than your god. Show respect, or be forgotten. Old Appalachian saying. The summer before I started college, I set my sights on hiking a portion of the Appalachian Trail. I'd been planning it for years, daily hikes through the woods in my town, solo camping trips, collecting gear one piece at a time with what I could scrape together. When I told my dad, he insisted on coming with me. For protection, he said. The irony is bitter now. I had protection. I had my bundle of sage and rosemary, coins, a lock of my hair, a sachet of salt, and iron nails I kept buried deep in my bag, passed down from my grandmother, who never once, ever entered the forest without hers. I also had protection against the more mortal predators, bear spray, a knife, a taser. But no talisman in the world could prepare me for what we'd awaken. When I showed my dad my supplies, he laughed. "You mean your little bags of seasoning and trinkets? Those won't save you from a bear or a murderer." "They weren't meant to," I'd muttered. Rule 1. Keep salt and iron on you. I'd learned that salt purifies and iron protects. A line of either can mean the difference between going home or being taken. The trailhead was too quiet when we arrived. Not peaceful, empty. The air felt wrong, like the forest was waiting for something, watching. The leaves didn't rustle, the birds didn't sing, and Dad didn't notice. He just stomped along in brand new boots, whistling a tune off key. His cheerful noise died instantly after leaving his lips, swallowed by the woods. I stayed silent, tucked the iron nail under my shirt where it brushed on my collarbone, cold against my skin. Rule 2. Don't whistle in the woods, my grandmother said. It calls spirits to you. We hiked for hours. As the afternoon went by, the trees changed. The pines grew tighter, closer, wrong. Their trunks were too thick, bark gnarled and blackened like burned flesh. The air grew hot and humid despite the elevation, wet like a held breath. Light barely filtered through the thickening canopy. Even in the middle of the day, it was grey and dim. And that's when I felt it. Not saw, felt. Like something massive, ancient, and cold had stirred beneath the earth and opened one eye. I stopped walking. Dad noticed and turned back. "Are you coming, Ellie?" he shouted, holding a walking stick that he'd probably found somewhere on the side of the trail. He'd just broken 2 rules in one go. Rule 3. Don't speak your name too loud. It lets them know who you are. And Rule 4. You never take things from the forest. Leave every stone, stick, and bone as you found it, I remembered. Some things belong to the forest. Some things guarded. Yeah, I lied, noticing that we'd somehow wandered off the main trail. Hopefully not too far. I shouldn't have been blindly following my dad, knowing that he didn't know how to read trail markers. Rule 5. Stay out of hollers you don't know. Some places are thin, I'd read. Time folds, trails change. You might walk forever and never leave. We kept going, tried to veer back towards the main trail, and then we saw it, right in the center of the path. A pile of blackened stones encircling a bare patch of dirt, and in its center, a bundle of twigs bound tightly with human hair. Human, by the look of it. Long, reddish-blonde strands matted together with something dark. The air stank. Copper, rot, and blood baked into the soil. "Leave it," I said, my voice low and sharp. "It's a warning." Dad knelt down and poked it with his walking stick. Probably just some hiker's weird little voodoo project. Don't let it freak you out." And then he muttered superstitious nonsense under his breath. "Dad, stop. Don't touch it." But it was too late. The stick scattered the stones. The wind shifted instantly. Sharp, cold, unnatural. It cut through the trees, though not a single branch moved. Then came the whistle. Not like Dad's rambling melody. It was a piercing, slow, almost human sound that climbed and fell in a way that made my teeth hurt. It came from nowhere. Everywhere. Behind us, ahead. Dad stood up abruptly. "Did you hear that?" I grabbed his arm. "Don't look back. Don't speak. Walk. Now." We walked. But now all signs of the trail were gone. The trees closed in behind us, and we passed the same tree again and again, its bark split in 3 deep vertical slashes too wide to be from a bear. "How the fuck are we going in circles?" Dad barked. "We've been walking straight the whole time." A second whistle cut through the air, closer this time. "Run!" I screamed. We ran. Branches tore at us, a fog suddenly descending to obscure our vision. Something moved through the trees with us, long-limbed, unnaturally fast. I caught glimpses, a shape with too many joints, a body that bent the wrong way, a face that shimmered and changed, wearing my face, then his, then neither. Rule 6. That's not a deer. My grandmother had sat me down, a grave expression on her face. If it walks like a deer, but the joints are wrong, if it looks at you like it knows you, if it stands on 2 legs, run. Don't scream. Don't look back. Looking back is an invitation to follow. We didn't stop running until night fell, and the thing was no longer behind us. Dad collapsed onto a log, panting and pale. "I think we're lost," he whispered. "You think?" I hissed, already digging into my pack for salt. "We should set up camp," I said. "Know where we're finding a way out in the dark." He didn't move, just sat there, shivering. "Ellie, that thing. It looked like a deer, but it wasn't. It stood like a man, and its face. My God, its face." He trailed off. "You shouldn't have touched the stones," my voice was flat. "Help me with the fire." Dinner was tasteless, quiet. I didn't even bother to finish my food. I poured a ring of salt around our camp and placed iron nails at each corner. It was all I could do. I woke to absolute darkness. The fire was out. The forest had gone still, dead quiet, like a killer sneaking up on a sleeping victim. And then I heard it. "Dad, help me!" My voice, but not. Off pitch, like a recording played at the wrong speed. The cadence all wrong, like someone was trying to speak a language they didn't understand. I froze in fear, my heart pounding out of my chest. Dad was already out of his tent, stumbling towards the sound. "Ellie! Ellie, where are you?" he shouted. I burst from my tent and grabbed his arm. "That's not me! I'm right here!" He jumped and screamed in alarm, and then turned to me, shaking. "Then who the fuck is that? Listen." We stood in silence. Then, "Dad, I'm scared. Please help me." Closer and closer. The underbush rustled to just past the tree line. I turned slowly. Something stood just beyond the edge of camp. Glowing eyes, not animal eyes, intelligent, patient, watching. Rule 7. If you see glowing eyes, run. More rustling, more eyes. "Back to camp, now!" I whispered. We scrambled back. I dumped the rest of the salt around the fire pit in a frantic circle, hands shaking as I struggled to get the flames going again. And from the trees it came again. "Dad! Ellie! Help me! Help!" The voices overlapped, changed, twisted into gurgling laughter. More glowing eyes emerged. 5, 6, maybe a dozen, all too high off the ground, blinking out and reappearing in different spots like whatever they belonged to didn't walk but crawled. We huddled by the fire. I threw sage into the flames and it hissed and sparkled. And some of the eyes blinked. Some just stared. Then one of the voices whispered from right outside the edge of the firelight. "You shouldn't have touched it." The voices kept circling the camp. Some cried, some laughed, some whispered things I couldn't understand, not in English, not in any language people were meant to know. The sounds grated at my eardrums, and I covered my ears. Dad sat stiff and pale beside me, eyes wide, clenching the iron nail I'd forced into his palm earlier. He looked like he wanted to scream but couldn't open his mouth, like something might crawl in if he did. I knew we couldn't sleep. We couldn't even blink for too long. We waited, and the fire was our only defense. My hand hovered near the salt pouch, though it was nearly empty now. Something flickered at the edge of the flames. Not in shadows, inside the fire itself. A face, not a reflection. A face, watching, smiling, hungry. "This isn't just haunting," I whispered. "It's a feeding ground." The forest had sealed us in. It wanted stories, memories, faces, flesh, and we had trespassed. We had touched what was sacred, broken the old laws. Sometime past midnight the fire burned low, and that was when the laughing stopped, replaced by another sound. Footsteps. Right at the edge of the salt, heavy, human. Then, "Ellie, you always did love the woods." I froze. That voice. It was my mum's. She died when I was 8. She'd been buried in a churchyard 3 towns over, her lungs filled with pneumonia and prayers. I hadn't heard her voice in nearly a decade, but I knew it instantly. I turned. I had to. Something stood just outside of the salt line. It looked like her. The right height, same dress from the funeral photo on our mantel, but the face, off, melted, smiling too wide, eyes too big and glassy. It didn't blink, didn't breathe. Rule 8. If you hear your name, don't answer. This is one of the most important rules. No matter how familiar the voice is, no matter how sweetly it calls, it isn't who you think it is. Behind it, something larger stirred in the trees, something tall enough to brush the lowest branches. Antlers scraped bark as it moved, but it didn't look like a deer. It looked like something wearing a deer. Dad was whimpering now. "This is my fault," he whispered. "This is my fault." I didn't disagree. I looked back to the figure of Mum. It leaned forward. One bare foot tested the edge of the salt. The tips of her toes blackened instantly when they crossed the line and cracked, crumbled like burnt paper. She hissed and withdrew. Good, the salt had held, but I didn't know how long it would last. I didn't know what else to do, so I did the only thing left. I asked for help. I pulled the last of the offerings from my pack. 3 small items wrapped in cloth, a coin, a piece of bread, and a strand of my own hair. I walked to the center of the camp, knees shaking, and placed them down carefully on a flat stone by the fire. And then I whispered the oldest words I knew, words my grandma taught me when I was barely old enough to speak. "For those who walked before, for those who guard the green, we mean no harm. Let us go unseen." Rule 9. Leave offerings if you must pass sacred ground. A coin, a sweet, a bit of bread. The old ones watch. Be polite. Be grateful. Do not speak their names. The forest shuddered. The wind roared suddenly through the trees, through the leaves, and they didn't move. A deep groan echoed beneath the earth, like old roots pulling themselves free. The figures at the edge of the salt, gone. In the eyes, in the trees, vanished. Even the fire quietened. The wood fell deathly silent. Not safe, not empty, but still, like something ancient had just turned its head away, deciding, for now, to let us go. The sun was beginning to rise. "Now," I said, grabbing Dad by the wrist. "We go now. Don't speak. Don't look back." We didn't pack anything. We didn't need to. Anything we left behind belonged to the forest now. I followed a path that hadn't been there before, a trail of crushed ferns and moss, lit faintly by a silvery glow filtering through the canopy. A deer path, but not a real one. A gift. A chance. We walked. When the sun rose finally, we found ourselves stumbling out of the tree line back at the gravel parking lot near the trailhead. Our car was still there, covered in leaves. We didn't speak until we were 3 towns away. Dad drove like he'd just been let out of prison, hands white-knuckled, eyes wide. Eventually he looked at me and said, "You said you had protection." "I did," I said. "And it worked?" he asked nervously. I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure that it had, because sometimes the forest lets you leave, and sometimes it just follows you home. Whoa, dang. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I'll tell you what, right? These were two absolutely brilliant stories. I have loved reading both of these. That second one, I didn't quite understand the cadence of it, but the moment that you get the pacing of how to read it, it just clicks, and it's almost like slam poetry. It's actually really cool. So props to both of the people who've written these stories. So we've got Creepy Stories Jr. and we've got Alex Scarins, as I'm calling them, but you can see their names here. Please send them your love. Please send them your best. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in today and listening to more Reddit tales. But now, chat, it's time to end. I will be back on Sunday with more Clair Obscure Expedition 33. And for those of you who have joined and have been enjoying this content, why not hit the like button down there? It really, really helps with all of this content. And if you're new, subscribe, because there's plenty more where this came from. I've got a whole back catalogue of Reddit stories for you to listen to if you want some nighttime reading. And also, in addition to that, I'm going to be reading more every Tuesday. So if you want more stories, you know where to drop them. We have a Discord. It's in chat, or it will be in a moment. If you go to the stream chat channel and post your favorite Reddit stories there, I will have a look through and I will pick some more that we can read. If I've not read your story yet, I apologize. It's most likely because a lot of people have been sending me stories and I just missed it. So please send it to me again if you haven't already seen or heard your story being read. And thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to the mods for keeping everyone safe. Like I say, I will be back on Sunday, but if you can't wait that long, you can find me everywhere on all social media at Mikey Scamp. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for listening. And I will see you all on Sunday. Have an amazing week ahead. And see you in the next one. Bye, chat. Bye, bye, bye.